It's hard to talk about it. My job was my safe place. It was the only place where I was just Natalie, not Brian's wife, not Linda's sister-in-law, just me. And then she appeared. It changed everything. I'm Natalie, I'm 38. I've been married to Brian for about 10 years. I work as a server in a restaurant. It's a busy place. It's a hard job. It's physically demanding, it's mentally demanding, but it's mine. I'm good at it. I know how to handle the stress. I know how to talk to people. I know how to manage 10 things at once. This job is important to me. It's not just about the money, though the money is important. It's about my sense of self. It's my independence. Brian doesn't really understand that. He has a different kind of job, an office job. He thinks my work is just something I do, a placeholder. He's a good man, Brian. He's kind, but he avoids conflict like it's a physical threat. And most of the conflict in our life comes from one place. His mother, Linda. From the moment I met her, I felt scrutinized. She has this way of looking at you. It's not an unkind look, not on the surface. It's a look of intense evaluation, like she's taking notes, filing information away for later. When Brian and I were getting married, she was very involved. Brian called it being helpful. I called it being controlling. She had an opinion on every single detail, not just an opinion, but a strong conviction that her way was the only right way. I remember trying to talk to Brian about it. I told him I felt like I was being pushed out of my own life decisions. He told me she was just excited. He said she just loved Brian so much and wanted everything to be perfect for him. He asked me to be patient with her. So I was. I bit my tongue. I let things go. I learned to do that a lot in the years that followed. Linda's concern always felt like it had an edge. She would call me, not Brian, to ask about our finances. She'd frame it as just wanting to make sure we were okay, that we were planning for the future. But the questions were so specific, so invasive. I would tell her we were fine. I kept my answers short and vague. Then I'd get a call from Brian. He'd tell me his mom had called him, worried about us. He would tell me she was just trying to help, that her father had taught her to be responsible with money. He would ask me why I couldn't just give her a straight answer to make her feel better. It was a pattern. Linda would cross a boundary. I would feel uncomfortable and pull back. She would then report her concern to Brian. And Brian, trying to keep the peace, would come to me and ask me to manage his mother's feelings. It was exhausting. The only place I didn't have to deal with any of it was my job. My work was my sanctuary. It was a world she knew nothing about. She didn't know my boss. She didn't know my coworkers. She didn't know the rhythm of my day. It was a space that was entirely, completely mine. I could be a professional there. I was respected for my skills, for my hard work. My performance was based on my ability, not on my relationship with her son. I needed that. I needed to have a part of my life that wasn't subject to her review. It was the one area where I felt competent and in control, where I wasn't being constantly measured against some invisible standard she had set. At home, I felt like I was always on shifting ground. She would come over to our house, often without calling first. She'd just appear. The excuse was always that she was in the neighborhood and just wanted to drop something off, but she never just dropped it off. She had to come inside, she had to see the house, she would walk through the rooms, and she would notice everything. A pile of laundry waiting to be folded, dishes in the sink, a little bit of dust on a shelf. She wouldn't say anything critical directly, not usually. She'd say things like, "Oh, honey, you look so tired. You're working so hard at that restaurant, you must be exhausted." The implication was clear. I was too tired to keep my house properly because of my job. My job was the problem. I tried to explain to Brian how it made me feel, how it felt like a constant low-level criticism of my life, of my choices. He would get this tired look on his face, the look he always gets when I bring up his mom. He told me I was being too sensitive. He told me she was from a different generation, a generation where women took pride in their homes. He said she wasn't criticizing me. She was trying to connect with me in the only way she knew how. He just wanted me to let it go, to not make it a big deal. So again, I did. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it wasn't personal, but it was personal. It was deeply personal. It was about my life, my home, my marriage, and it was about my job. She never approved of my job. She never said it out loud, not in so many words, but she would make comments. She would ask if I was still working those long hours. She would ask if it was hard being on my feet all day. She'd mention her friend's daughter, who had a nice office job with regular hours. Every comment was a little jab, a little reminder that what I was doing was not what she would have chosen for her son's wife. It was, in her eyes, not respectable enough. It didn't reflect well on the family. I knew this, even though it was never spoken. I could feel it in the way she talked about my work, like it was a temporary thing I was doing, a hobby, not a career, not a serious part of my identity. But it was a serious part of my identity. It was the most serious part. It was the part of me that I had built on my own, without Brian, without her, without anyone. It was my proof to myself that I was capable, and I guarded it. I kept it separate. I didn't talk about work at family dinners. If Linda asked me how my job was, I'd just say, "It's fine." I built a wall around that part of my life, a thick one. I thought it was strong enough to keep her out. I was wrong. The call started a few months ago, not to me, to the restaurant. The first time it happened, my manager came to get me. He said my mother-in-law was on the phone. She was asking if I was okay. I was confused. I took the call in the back office. Linda's voice was full of manufactured panic. She said she had been trying to call my cell and it went straight to voicemail. She said she got worried that something had happened to me. My phone had been in my locker, turned off. That's the rule at work. We can't have our phones on us during a shift. I told her that. I told her I was fine, just busy. She kept on, her voice high and tight. She said she just had a bad feeling. A mother's intuition, she called it, even though she wasn't my mother. I felt a hot flash of annoyance. She was creating a drama over nothing. I told her I had to get back to work. I hung up the phone. My manager asked if everything was all right. I felt my face get hot. I was embarrassed. I told him it was just a misunderstanding. I felt like a child, like my mom had called my school. When I got home that night, I told Brian what happened. I told him how unprofessional it was, how it made me look in front of my manager. He listened, but he didn't get it. He said, "So she was worried about you. What's the big deal?" I tried to explain. It wasn't about her being worried. It was about her calling my workplace. It was about her making a scene. He just shook his head. He told me I was overreacting. He said, "She's just a concerned mother. You know how she is." I know how she is. I heard that phrase so many times. It was the excuse for everything. It was the reason I had to tolerate her unannounced visits. It was the reason I had to endure her intrusive questions. It was the reason I had to accept her veiled criticisms of my job. Because that's just how she is. And I was expected to be the one who managed it, the one who absorbed it, the one who kept the peace. A week later, it happened again. Another phone call in the middle of a busy dinner rush. This time, she told my manager that it was an emergency. A family emergency. I ran to the phone, my heart pounding. I thought something had happened to Brian or to her. I picked it up, breathless. She wanted to know what time I would be home. That was the emergency. She was planning to drop off some leftovers from a dinner she had made, and she wanted to make sure I'd be home to put them in the fridge. I didn't say anything for a second. I was just silent. I could hear her on the other end of the line, waiting. I felt this cold, clear anger rise up in me. I told her to never ever call my work and say it's an emergency unless someone is dying or in the hospital. I told her it was unacceptable. Her voice immediately changed. It became wounded, defensive. She told me she was just trying to do something nice for us. She said I was being ungrateful, that I had no idea how much she did for us. I told her I had to go, and I hung up the phone. I walked out of the office. My hands were shaking. One of my coworkers saw my face and asked if I was okay. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. I felt humiliated. I went into the restroom and just stood there for a few minutes, trying to breathe. She was bringing her drama into my space. She was chipping away at the wall I had built. When I talked to Brian that night, it was a real fight. I was so angry. I told him his mother was deliberately trying to undermine me at my job. He got defensive. He said I was being unfair. He said she was probably just lonely and wanted to feel needed. He asked me to have a little compassion. Compassion. I felt like that was all I ever had for her. My compassion was a blank check she kept cashing, and my own feelings didn't seem to matter. My need for professional boundaries, my need for a space of my own. It all came second to Linda's need to be involved. The fight didn't resolve anything. We just went to bed angry. After that, the call stopped. For a while, I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to her. I thought maybe she understood. I started to relax. My shoulders, which had been tense for weeks, started to feel normal again. Work started to feel like my safe space again. I was a fool to think it would last. She wasn't done. She was just changing her strategy. If she couldn't reach me by phone, she would find another way, a more direct way. It was a Tuesday, a typically slow night, but we had a big party reservation, so the place was humming. I was in the weeds, juggling orders, refilling drinks, making sure the big table was happy. I was in my element, I was focused, I felt competent, and then I saw her. She was standing at the host stand talking to my manager. My stomach just dropped. It felt like it fell through the floor. It didn't make sense. Why was she here? My manager caught my eye and gave me a little nod. You've got a visitor kind of nod. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, my co-workers, the customers. I took a deep breath and walked over. Linda turned to me, a bright artificial smile on her face. She told me she was in the area for an appointment and thought she would just pop in to see me, to see where I work. She said she was so curious to finally see the place I spent so much time. My manager was standing right there, smiling politely. I felt trapped. There was nothing I could do, nothing I could say. I had to play along. I had to pretend this was a normal welcome surprise. I told her it was nice to see her. The words felt like ash in my mouth. My manager, trying to be helpful, suggested she take a table. He said I could take my break and sit with her for a bit. The last thing on earth I wanted to do was sit with her. Not here, but I had to. It was a command disguised as a suggestion, so I nodded. I led her to a small table in the corner of my section. As I walked, I could feel her eyes on everything. She wasn't looking at me. She was scanning the room, the staff, the customers. She was assessing the situation. I seated her. I told her I'd be back in a few minutes after I checked on my other tables. She just smiled and said, "Take your time, dear. I'm just happy to be here and watch you in action." Watch me in action. That's when I understood. This wasn't a social visit. This was an inspection. I went back to my tables, but my focus was gone. I felt like I had a spotlight on me. I could feel her gaze on my back. Every move I made, every word I said to a customer, I was aware of her watching me. I felt clumsy. I felt self-conscious. The easy confidence I normally had was just gone, replaced by a knot of anxiety in my stomach. She was judging my performance, my professionalism, my tone of voice. She was judging my job. I took my break and sat down with her. I felt like I was walking to my own execution. I asked her if she wanted something to drink. She waved her hand dismissively. She said she didn't want to be a bother. Then she started. She told me the restaurant was much louder than she expected. She told me one of the other servers seemed a bit frazzled. She asked if my manager was always so informal. Every comment was a subtle critique, not of me directly, of my workplace. But by criticizing my workplace, she was criticizing my choice to be there. She was confirming her own preconceived notion that this job was beneath me, beneath the family. I just sat there and nodded. I gave non-committal answers. I was trying so hard to remain professional, to not let my anger show. This was my job. I couldn't have a personal meltdown in the middle of the dining room. She knew that. I think that's why she did it there. She knew I was powerless. She had all the control. I told her I had to get back to work. The relief I felt when I stood up from that table was immense. She said she would just sit for a little while longer, just to soak in the atmosphere. She stayed for another hour. She just sat at that table alone with a glass of water. And she watched me. I tried to ignore her. I tried to focus on my customers. But it was impossible. She was a constant presence. A black hole in the corner of my section, sucking all the air out of the room. My co-workers noticed. They kept giving me sympathetic looks. They knew who she was. They had heard the phone calls. Now they were seeing the source of the drama in person. I felt so exposed, so embarrassed. This was my professional space, and she had turned it into a stage for our family dysfunction. When she finally got up to leave, she walked over to me. She put her hand on my arm. She told me I did a good job. She said it was clear I worked very hard. It sounded like a compliment, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a headmistress patting a student on the head. A confirmation that I had passed her inspection. For now. Then she walked out. The moment the door closed behind her, I had to go to the back. I leaned against a wall and just closed my eyes. I felt violated. That night, the conversation with Brian was different. I wasn't yelling. I was too tired to yell. I just told him very calmly what had happened. I told him his mother came to my job and sat there for almost 2 hours, just watching me. He was quiet for a long time, then he said that maybe she was just trying to show an interest in your life. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after the calls, after the emergency, after this public display of control, he was still defending her. I asked him, an interest? Brian, she was auditing me. She was inspecting my life. He sighed, the same tired sigh. He said, Natalie, what do you want me to do? She's my mother. I didn't have an answer for him then. I was too stunned. I just realized in that moment that I was completely on my own in this. He was never going to choose my side. He was never going to set a boundary. His priority was not my well-being. It was avoiding a difficult conversation with his mom. That night, I felt a distance from Brian that I had never felt before. It was like a crack had formed between us, and I knew with a sinking feeling that it was going to get wider. The next week, she came back. It was a Friday night this time, the busiest night of the week. She didn't try to talk to the manager. She just walked in and sat at a table in my section, like she was a regular customer. I had to go over. I had to take her order. I stood there with my notepad, my professional smile plastered on my face. I asked her what I could get for her. She ordered a salad and a water with lemon, and then she settled in to watch. It was worse this time, because now I knew what to expect. The anxiety wasn't a surprise. It was a constant humming dread. I could feel her eyes on me every second. When I was at the computer putting in orders, when I was at the bar getting drinks, when I was talking to other customers, I felt like I was an actor in a play, and she was the only person in the audience. My hands were sweating. I almost dropped a plate. My manager noticed I was off my game. He pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I just nodded and said I was fine. What else could I say? Could I tell him that my mother-in-law was psychologically tormenting me in the middle of a dinner rush? He wouldn't understand. It sounded crazy. Linda stayed for 2.5 hours. She ate her salad so slowly it was painful to watch. She made it last. She was maximizing her time, her observation time. When I brought her the check, she had some more feedback for me. She told me I seemed stressed. She said, you should really try to smile more, dear. Your customers will appreciate it. I just stood there, holding the check presenter. I didn't say a word. I felt the anger coiling in my gut again, but it was mixed with a feeling of hopelessness. What could I do? She paid her bill, left a small tip, and left. The moment she was gone, the tension in my body released so fast I felt dizzy. I finished my shift in a daze. I felt numb. When I got home, I didn't even want to talk to Brian. I just wanted to be alone. I knew he wouldn't get it. I knew he would have another excuse for her. She probably just liked the salad and wanted to come back. I could almost hear him saying it, so I said nothing. But the silence was heavy. The space between us was growing. This became the new normal. She would show up once, sometimes twice a week. She always sat in my section. She always ordered something small. And she always watched. Sometimes she would bring a book or a magazine, but she never read it. It was a prop. Her real focus was me. My co-workers all knew the situation. They tried to be supportive. Sometimes they would try to take her table for me, but she would insist on having me as her server. She would tell them, oh no, I'm here to see Natalie. It's a little family visit. She was marking her territory. She was making it clear that I was the reason she was there. My performance at work started to suffer. I was making small mistakes, forgetting things, mixing up orders. I was so consumed by the anxiety of her presence that I couldn't focus on the details of my job, the job that I used to be so good at. My manager had a talk with me. He was gentle about it. He said he knew I had some family stress going on. He said he noticed my performance had slipped a bit. He asked if there was anything the restaurant could do to help. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. I had always taken so much pride in my work, in my professionalism, and now my personal life, the very thing I tried to keep separate, was bleeding into it and ruining it. I told him I was sorry. I told him I would do better. I promised him it wouldn't be a problem anymore, but I had no idea how to make that promise come true. I felt completely powerless. Linda had found my weak spot. She had found the one place where I had to be polite. where I had to be accommodating, where I couldn't just walk away or hang up the phone. She was using my own professionalism against me. It was brilliant, in a sick, twisted way. I started to dread going to work. The place that had once been my refuge now felt like a trap. Every time the front door opened, my stomach would clench. I would brace myself, expecting to see her walk in. I was living with a constant low-grade fear. The situation at home was deteriorating. Brian and I were barely speaking. He knew I was unhappy. He could see the stress I was under, but he refused to acknowledge the cause. If I tried to bring up his mother, he would shut down. He'd leave the room. He'd say he didn't want to talk about it. It was easier for him to pretend it wasn't happening. It was easier than confronting her. I felt so alone. I was trapped in this nightmare, and the one person who was supposed to be my partner was looking the other way. I started to feel a resentment toward him that scared me. It was a deep, cold anger. He was choosing her. Over and over again, he was the red taillights of her sensible sedan vanished around the corner. A collective exhale seemed to move through the restaurant. An invisible tension I hadn't even realized was holding everyone captive. Maria, my co-worker, came over and put a hand on my arm. Her grip was firm, grounding. "You okay?" she asked, her dark eyes full of a sympathy I couldn't accept. If I accepted it, I would crumble. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Fine, just a long day." It was a lie. It wasn't the day that was long. It was the 4 hours she was there. 4 hours of being an exhibit. My mother-in-law, the observer. I finished my shift on autopilot, my movements mechanical. I cleared my other tables, ran credit cards, and polished silverware, but I wasn't really there. I was still in that corner booth, trapped under her gaze. My safe space had been contaminated. The bell on the door, which I used to love for its cheerful announcement of new guests, now sounded like a trigger. I didn't want to go home. The drive was quiet. The city blurred past my windows, a smear of neon and headlights that did nothing to distract me from the film reel playing in my mind. Linda's placid smile, the slow, deliberate way she'd lift her fork, the way her eyes followed me across the floor. She never looked away, not once. My compassion for her, for the lonely woman Brian always described, had been a blank check she kept cashing. Now the account was overdrawn. All that was left was a hard, cold knot of resentment in my stomach. I was tired of making excuses for her. I was tired of Brian making them for me. That's just how she is. The phrase echoed in my head, Brian's voice, calm and reasonable. It was his shield. He avoids conflict like it's a physical threat, and his mother is the greatest threat of all. So he makes me the buffer. He makes her my problem. I was wrong to think this would stop. I was wrong to think Brian would ever see it. The house was quiet when I got in. The only light came from the flickering blue of the television in the living room. Brian was on the couch, feet up, a beer sweating on the coaster beside him. He smiled when I walked in. It was a good, kind smile. The smile of a man who has no idea his world is about to catch fire. "Hey, you," he said, patting the cushion next to him. "Tough night?" I didn't sit down. I stood in the entryway, my bag still slung over my shoulder, the keys still clutched in my hand, the metal dug into my palm. "She was there again, Brian." His smile faltered just for a second. "Oh, well, how was she? Did she like the salmon this time?" He didn't get it. He refused to get it. It was a choice. "She sat in my section for 4 hours and watched me," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the hysteria he was so quick to assign to me. "She ordered 1 iced tea and a house salad with no dressing. She was there to watch me, to judge me." He sighed, the sound of a man burdened. He muted the television. "Nat, come on. She's retired. She's bored. She probably just missed you and wanted to see you in your element." "My element?" I let out a short, sharp laugh. "It was a performance. I'm a server, Brian, not a zoo animal." My manager had to talk to me. My tips were garbage because I couldn't focus on my other tables. I was terrified of dropping something, of saying the wrong thing. Do you understand? She's not doing it because she misses me. She's doing it to get to me. "That's a really unfair thing to say," he said, his voice taking on that familiar defensive edge. "She's my mother. She loves you. You're twisting this into something ugly. You're being too sensitive." He didn't say the words, but they hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "Am I?" I dropped my keys on the small entry table. They clattered, loud in the silence. What about the phone calls? The family emergency, that was just her wanting to know what kind of floor cleaner I use? Is that me being sensitive too? That was a mistake. She apologized. She apologized for worrying me, not for lying. There's a difference. My voice was rising and I hated it. I hated that he could back me into this corner, that he could make me sound like the unreasonable one. She is deliberately, methodically, trying to push me out of my own life. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, my friendships, and now she's coming after my job. The one thing that is mine, and you just sit here and tell me she loves me. What do you want me to do? He finally exploded, standing up. You want me to call my elderly mother and tell her she's not allowed to eat at a public restaurant? Do you hear how crazy that sounds? I want you to have my back, I shouted, the word tearing from my throat. I want you to believe me. I want you to, for once, prioritize your wife's sanity over your mother's feelings. He just stared at me. His face was a mask of frustration and disbelief. He saw a hysterical woman. He didn't see the person he married drowning right in front of him. She's just trying to help, he said, his voice low and defeated. It was a death blow. He would never get it. He would never choose me. I turned and walked into our bedroom, closing the door behind me. I didn't slam it. That would have been a release. Instead, I clicked it shut. The sound quiet, final. It changed everything. Before that night, I thought our problem was Linda. I realized then that the problem was Brian. The next Saturday was my busiest shift, brunch. A chaotic 3-hour storm of mimosas, eggs Benedict, and demanding customers. I usually loved it. The fast pace cleared my head. It was pure muscle memory and adrenaline. That day, I dreaded it. Every time the bell on the door chimed, my stomach plummeted. I scanned the crowd, looking for her silver hair, her thin smile. For the first hour, she wasn't there. I started to relax. A foolish mistake. She arrived at 1 o'clock. And she wasn't alone. She was with a woman I recognized from family holidays, another widow from her bridge club named Carol. Linda was beaming, holding court at the host stand. We're here to see Natalie, she announced to my manager Dave, as if booking a celebrity appearance. We'll need a table in her section, of course. Dave looked at me, his expression a mixture of pity and professional weariness. He seated them at table 42, a four-top right in the middle of my station. It was a stage. Natalie, dear, Linda called, waving me over. Carol gave me a tight, pitying smile. Carol has heard so much about this lovely little place. I had to show her. It was brilliant, horribly, cruelly brilliant. By bringing a friend, she had transformed her invasive surveillance into a social outing. She had an audience. I couldn't say a word without looking like an ungrateful, hostile daughter-in-law in front of a witness. She was a black hole in the corner of my section, sucking all the air out of the room. The performance began. Linda would praise me to Carol, but always with a qualifier. She's such a hard worker. It must be exhausting, all this running around. I worry she's overdoing it. Look at her, balancing all those plates. She's surprisingly strong, isn't she? Carol would nod along, her eyes following me, with a kind of morbid curiosity. They spoke in hushed tones when I was at other tables, their heads bent together. I could feel their whispers on my back. I felt my smile become a rictus grin. My hands started to shake. I almost dropped a tray of mimosas, catching it at the last second. Linda saw. Her eyes widened with a flicker of triumphant concern. They stayed for 2 hours. They ordered appetizers, entrees, and dessert, ensuring I had to return to their table again and again. Each visit was a small torture. Linda would ask me questions she knew the answer to, her voice laced with a cloying sweetness. Now, dear, remind me, is the chicken organic? When it was finally over, when I had run her credit card and she'd left me a pointedly exact 20% tip, I felt a wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy. I watched them walk toward the door. I had survived, but Linda had one last move. She stopped at the host stand, where Dave was reviewing the reservation book. She placed a delicate manicured hand on his forearm, forcing him to look at her. I was only a few feet away, clearing a nearby table, and her voice carried, perfectly pitched to sound confidential, but loud enough for me to hear. Thank you for everything, David, she said, her tone intimate and conspiratorial. You take good care of our Natalie. She can be a bit fragile. We worry. Fragile. The word hit me like a stone. It landed and it stayed. She hadn't said it to me. She had said it to my boss. She had planted a seed of doubt, not about my work ethic. That was too obvious, but about my stability, my mental state. I stood there, holding a stack of dirty plates, and I finally understood. She wasn't just trying to get me to quit. She was trying to get me fired. She was building a narrative, piece by piece, that I was unstable, unreliable, fragile. And in the silence of the restaurant after she left, with Dave's careful, unreadable eyes on me, I felt myself begin to crumble. She was right. The sound in the back office was a low mechanical hum, the whir of the computer that ran our POS system. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, a background noise that meant my shift was ending. But now it was the only thing I could hear. It filled my head, drowning out the echo of my manager's words. Fragile. She's just not herself lately. Worried about you. David had been kind. He had been trying to be supportive, I think. He placed a hand on my shoulder before I left the office, his expression a careful mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. Just take it easy, Natalie, he'd said. Let me know if you need anything. He was trying to help, but all I heard was that Linda had won. She had planted the seed. Now, when he looked at me, he wouldn't see his competent, reliable head server. He would see the fragile woman his mother-in-law had described. He would be watching me for cracks. I walked out of the office. The restaurant was a blur of motion and noise. My co-workers were finishing their side work, laughing and complaining about their last tables. I felt completely disconnected from it, like I was watching a movie of my own life. My body went through the motions. I cashed out, tipped out the busser and the bartender, wiped down my section one last time. Every movement was heavy, weighed down. My friend Maria, another server, caught my eye as I was grabbing my purse. You okay, Nat? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Just tired. Long day. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me. She knew something was wrong. They all would soon. Linda hadn't just spoken to David, she had spoken to all of them. She had rewritten my story without my permission. I was no longer Natalie, the unflappable pro who could handle a 12 top and a needy 2 top without breaking a sweat. I was Natalie, the poor fragile thing, the one to be watched, the one to be pitied. The drive home was 22 minutes of suffocating silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the pavement and the furious, frantic beating of my own heart. The anger was a physical thing. It started as a hot knot in my stomach and spread through my veins, a poison. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not overzealous concern. This was a targeted attack. She had found the one place that was mine, the one place I felt strong, and she had set it on fire. She was trying to get me fired. The thought was so monstrous, so far beyond the pale of normal family conflict that it had taken me until now to fully accept it. She wanted to take away my income, my independence, my identity. She wanted to break me down until all that was left was Brian's wife, a woman dependent and small enough to fit into the box she had built for me. I parked the car and sat in the driveway for a full minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I was not going to cry. I was not going to scream. I was going to walk into that house and I was going to make my husband understand. He had to. There was no other option. He was on the couch, of course. The TV was on, some action movie blaring. He smiled when I walked in. Hey, hun, rough one. I didn't answer. I walked over to the television and turned it off. The sudden silence was loud. He sat up, his smile faltering. Oh, what's wrong? I stood in front of him, my keys still clutched in my fist. Your mother came to the restaurant today. He sighed, a long, weary sound, the sound of a man who avoids conflict like it's a physical threat. Nat, we talked about this. She brought a friend, I said, my voice flat and cold. It didn't even sound like my own. She sat in my section for 3 hours, and then she went to my manager, David, and told him she was worried about me. She told him I was fragile and not myself. Brian stared at me. For a second, I saw shock in his eyes, a flicker of it. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar practiced neutrality he wore like armor. Are you sure? He asked. Are you sure that's what she said? Maybe David misunderstood. He didn't misunderstand, Brian. He told me exactly what she said. She put on a performance. The concerned mother-in-law, worried sick about her unstable daughter-in-law who can't handle the stress of her little waitressing job. Okay, just calm down, he said, holding up his hands. You're getting worked up. My mom loves you. She wouldn't try to hurt you. That's when something inside me finally broke. It wasn't a loud, shattering noise. It was a quiet, decisive snap. The last thread of my patience. She doesn't love me, I said, the words coming out sharp and clear. She hates me. She hates my job. She hates my independence. And she is actively trying to get me fired. She is trying to destroy the one part of my life that I have for myself. Your mother is trying to ruin me. Natalie, that's an insane thing to say. He shot back, his voice rising. She's my mother. Why can't you just see that she's coming from a place of love? A place of love? I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Is it love to harass me at work? To fake a family emergency? To sit and scrutinize me for hours like I'm an insect under a microscope? Is it love to go to my boss and try to paint me as mentally unstable? Tell me, Brian, which part of that is love? He stood up, his face flushed. You twist everything. You always assume the worst of her. And you always assume the best of her no matter what she does to me. You leave me to handle it, to absorb it, to just get over it. But this is different. This isn't just about my feelings anymore. This is about my job, my reputation, my ability to pay our bills. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. She crossed a line she can never uncross, and you are letting her. You are standing right there, watching her do it, and you are telling me that I'm the one who's wrong. He just stared at me, his mouth a thin, hard line. He had nothing to say, no defense, no solution. He just wanted it to be over. You have to choose, I said, the words tasting like ash. You have to tell her to stop. You have to tell her she is not welcome at my work, that her behavior is unacceptable, and that if she does it again, there will be consequences. He looked away. He ran a hand through his hair. You're putting me in an impossible position. She put us here, I corrected him. I'm just asking you whose side you're on. He didn't answer. He just walked out of the room. I heard the back door slide open and then shut. He had escaped. Again. I stood alone in the quiet living room, the silence a confirmation of everything I now knew to be true. I was on my own. My home was not a safe space. My husband was not an ally. He was a bystander. And in a war like this, a bystander is just a casualty waiting to happen. The next few days at home were cold. We moved around each other, speaking only when necessary. Did you take out the trash? We're out of milk. The vast, unspoken chasm between us grew wider with every passing hour. Brian was waiting for me to apologize, to admit I'd been too sensitive. He didn't understand that the woman who used to do that was gone. Work was worse. The air was different. David was polite but distant. He watched my every move. When I dropped a fork during the Tuesday lunch rush, I saw him flinch. The word was tattooed on my forehead. Fragile. Linda didn't come back on Wednesday or Thursday. A small, naive part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, she had gotten what she wanted. She had unsettled me, poisoned the well with my boss. Maybe that was enough. I was wrong. She came on Friday, right at noon, the peak of the lunch rush. The restaurant was slammed. I was in the weeds, juggling 3 tables that had all been seated at once. I saw her before she saw me. She was alone this time, and she chose a small two-top in the corner of my section, a sniper's nest. She didn't wave. She just sat, her purse in her lap, and watched me. I took a deep breath, plastered on my work smile, and walked over. Linda, what a surprise. Natalie, dear, she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. You look absolutely swamped. Are you sure you're managing okay? I'm fine, I said through gritted teeth. What can I get for you? She ordered an iced tea and a salad, and then the performance began. As I rushed from the kitchen to my table, I could feel her eyes on me. But it was different this time. She wasn't just observing. She was waiting for an opening. It came when table 12. A family with 2 toddlers made a glorious mess. Ketchup on the floor, water spilled, crayons everywhere. As I knelt to clean it up, my other table's food came up in the window. I felt a surge of panic. My timing was off. I was falling behind, and then it happened. I saw Linda stand up from her table. She walked over to table 14, where an elderly couple had just finished their meal. With a sad, sympathetic smile, she began clearing their plates. "Oh, don't you worry," she said to the startled couple, her voice loud enough for the whole section to hear. "Natalie is just so overwhelmed, poor dear. Let me give her a hand." The man looked from her to me, confused. My face burned with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. She wasn't just saying I was fragile anymore. She was proving it. She was demonstrating my incompetence for all to see, my coworkers, my other tables, my manager. I stood up, my hands shaking. "Linda," I said, my voice tight, "please sit down. I have it under control." She just gave me that pitying look. "Of course, dear. Whatever you say." She placed the plates she'd collected onto a nearby service station and walked back to her table, a picture of matronly concern. The damage was done. I saw Maria staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. I saw David standing by the host stand, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She had turned my sanctuary into a stage for her psychodrama, and I was the unwilling star. She finished her salad slowly, paid her bill, and left a $10 tip on a $12 check. Her final little twist of the knife. As she walked out, she didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I finished the shift in a daze. The anger, the shock, the humiliation, it all melted away, cooling and hardening into something else. Something cold and clear. A resolve. I drove home, but this time I didn't think about Brian. I didn't think about what I would say to him or how I could make him understand. It was no longer his problem to solve. It was mine. She wanted a war. She had fired the first shots, the second, the third. She had invaded my territory and tried to burn it to the ground. She thought I was fragile. She thought I would break. She was about to find out how wrong she was. Brian wouldn't protect me. My manager couldn't protect me. My job couldn't protect me. So I would have to protect myself. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. The quiet that followed the humiliation was a strange thing. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, weighted with everything I had refused to see. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights bleeding into one another. The sound of the engine was a low hum that did nothing to fill the silence inside my head. The despair was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but something else was forming around it, hardening. It's a strange kind of liberation, hitting bottom. When you have nothing left to protect, you have nothing left to lose. My job, my competence, my confidence. Linda had taken a hammer to all of it. My marriage, Brian had let her. My safe space was gone, so I would have to build a fortress instead. When I walked through the door, the house was quiet. Brian was on the couch, laptop open, but he wasn't working, he was waiting. The air was thick with his anxiety. He avoids conflict like it's a physical threat, and he could smell it coming. He stood up. "Nat, are you okay? David called me." Of course he did. David, my manager, probably thought he was helping. Calling the husband of the fragile woman who just had a public meltdown. Another man trying to manage my emotions for me. "I'm fine," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tears he was expecting. He took a step closer, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Honey, I am so sorry. I can't believe she did that. It was completely out of line." I just looked at him. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch, watching him become more and more uncomfortable in it. This was new for him. I always filled the silence. I cried, I yelled, I pleaded. I did the emotional work for both of us. Not anymore. She saw you were struggling," he began, falling back into the old, familiar script. "She probably thought she was helping." There it was, the excuse, the immediate pivot to her intentions, erasing the reality of her impact. Before, this would have broken me. It would have been proof that I was alone. Now it was just data, information I could use. "She told a customer that I was overwhelmed and that she would take their drink order," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a news anchor's. "She then went behind the bar, which is a health code violation, and tried to make a margarita. She spilled the mix. A busser had to clean it up, all while I stood there. I wasn't asking for his sympathy. I was documenting. Brian winced. Okay, that's bad. I'll talk to her. I promise. I'll make it clear she can't do that again. No, I said. The word hung in the air between us. It was small, but it was solid. He blinked. No? What do you mean, no? I mean, you're not going to talk to her, I said, walking past him toward the bedroom. It won't help. It never helps. It just tells her what boundary to cross next. I closed the bedroom door behind me, leaving him standing alone in the living room. It was the first time I'd ever shut him out like that. It felt less like a victory and more like a necessary amputation. He wanted peace. But what he called peace was just my silence. My compassion had been a blank check she kept cashing. The account was now closed. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I didn't cry. The time for that was over. Crying was a request for comfort, for help. I was done asking. Linda had been playing a game, a long, insidious game where she set the rules and I didn't even know I was a player. She used the language of love and concern as her weapons. She used social niceties as her shield. She was a black hole in the corner of my section, and she was a loving mother-in-law just checking in. She was two things at once, and that ambiguity was her power. I couldn't fight her on her terms. I couldn't have a direct confrontation because she would twist it. She would be the wounded mother, and I would be the cruel, ungrateful daughter-in-law. Brian would be the judge, and he always ruled in her favor, so I had to change the game. My mind, which had been a fog of anxiety for weeks, was suddenly sharp. The path forward wasn't about getting her to stop. It was about changing how she was seen. The next morning, I went to the restaurant an hour before my shift. My hands were steady. My heart was a cold, rhythmic drum. I found David in his office, hunched over scheduling sheets. He looked up, his expression wary. He was expecting tears, a resignation, a complaint. I gave him none of that. I stood in the doorway. David, do you have a minute? Sure, Natalie, come in, sit down. I remained standing. It felt more powerful. I wanted to apologize for the scene yesterday, I started. It was unprofessional, and I'm sorry that my family issues spilled onto the floor. He seemed surprised. You don't have to apologize. Your mother-in-law... He trailed off, unsure of the right thing to say. She means well, I said, using the exact phrase Brian always used. I watched the words land. It was the last thing he expected to hear from me. She's just been a little different lately. Very worried, a little forgetful. She gets an idea in her head and she can't let it go. I let that hang in the air. I was planting a seed, a new story. It wasn't Natalie is fragile. It was Linda is confused. I saw a flicker of understanding, or maybe pity in his eyes. He was reframing the event. The crazy mother-in-law, not the unstable employee. I'm really sorry she put you in that position, he said, his tone shifting from managerial to sympathetic. It's okay. I'm learning how to handle it, I said, and the words were true, just not in the way he thought. I just wanted to assure you it won't be a problem for my work again. I've got it under control. It was a lie. I had no idea if I had it under control, but I said it with a conviction that felt almost real. I was creating a new character for myself, not the victim, the competent professional managing a difficult family situation. I left his office and went to the locker room to change. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the old ownership. This was my space. I was taking it back. Not by kicking her out, but by recasting her role in the play she'd written. She wasn't the inspector. She was the project. My shift started. The Saturday lunch rush was its usual chaos, but I moved through it with a new grim purpose. Every glass I polished, every order I took was an act of defiance. I was still being watched. I could feel the ghost of her presence in the corner booth. But the feeling had changed. I wasn't just prey anymore. I was bait. I knew she would be back. Her victory had been too complete. She had seen me crumble. She would be back to sweep up the pieces, to confirm her power. She wouldn't be able to resist. And when she came, I would be ready. I would be calm. I would be concerned. I would treat her exactly how one treats a confused elderly woman who has wandered into a place she doesn't belong. I would be kind. I would be patient. I would be patronizing. I would do it all in front of my coworkers, my manager. I would use her own weapons against her. The bell over the restaurant door chimed with each new customer, and every time my head would snap up. The dread was still there, a low thrum beneath my ribs. But it was mixed with something else now, a cold, sharp anticipation. I was no longer waiting for the end. I was waiting for the beginning. Let her come. It's strange what happens when hope dies. You expect it to be a dramatic, shattering event, a great crumbling. For me, it was quiet. It was a lock clicking into place. The part of me that had spent a decade pleading to be seen, to be heard, to be believed by Brian simply went cold and silent. The exhaustion remained, but underneath it, something new and hard had formed. It was a resolve made not of anger, but of sheer, unadulterated necessity. I had to become the villain in her story to be the hero of my own. The plan was simple. It was terrifying. It was the only thing I had left. I would no longer fight Linda's narrative. I would create my own. A story so full of gentle, loving concern that it would suffocate hers. I would take the very weapon she used against me, the performance of care, and I would master it. I went to work the next day feeling hollowed out. My co-workers, Maria and Jess, gave me worried looks. After Linda's stunt with the plates, my manager David had spoken to them. He'd told them to keep an eye on me, to help out if I looked overwhelmed. He thought he was helping, but all it did was reinforce Linda's story. Natalie is fragile. Natalie can't handle it. I was being managed, handled. I was a problem to be solved. For 2 days, Linda didn't come. The quiet was worse than her presence. Every time the bell over the door chimed, my stomach would clench. I'd scan the entrance. My body braced. Brian and I moved around each other at home like polite ghosts. He'd ask if I was okay, and I'd say, "I'm fine." The words were a wall. He didn't try to climb it. He was relieved not to have to. He wanted peace, and my silence was a form of peace he could accept. It was easier than dealing with the truth. Then on Thursday, during the lunch rush, she arrived. She chose her usual table, the small two-top by the window that gave her a panoramic view of my entire section. She settled her purse on the empty chair, folded her hands on the table, and waited. She didn't even look at a menu. She knew what she wanted. Me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. My hands felt slick. For a moment, the old panic threatened to rise, the familiar feeling of being a bug under a magnifying glass. I took a deep breath in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of garlic and hot oil. I looked at my reflection in the steel of the pass-through window. My eyes were wide, my face pale. "You can do this," I told myself. The voice wasn't hopeful. It was flat. An order. I grabbed a notepad and a glass of iced tea with lemon, just how she liked it. I walked toward her table. It felt like walking onto a stage. Every step was deliberate. I could feel Maria watching from the server station, her brow furrowed with worry. I placed the iced tea on her table, my movements smooth and practiced. "Linda," I said. My voice was softer than I intended, but it worked. It sounded gentle, concerned. "I was hoping I'd see you today." She was visibly taken aback. She expected avoidance, anxiety, a clipped and resentful tone. She did not expect a warm welcome. "Well, I was in the neighborhood," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, searching my face for the trap. I leaned in a little, lowering my voice as if sharing a secret. "I'm so glad. I've been worried about you." This was it, the first move. Her perfectly constructed mask of placid observation faltered. "Worried? About me? Why on earth would you be worried about me?" I smiled, a sad, knowing little smile. I let my eyes drift around the bustling restaurant before landing back on her. "It's just after that business the other day. When you were trying to help with the plates, you seemed so confused, and I was terrified you were going to fall." I watched the words land. I saw the flash of fury in her eyes before it was instantly suppressed. She was furious that I'd brought it up. She was furious that I was twisting it. Her helping was meant to be a public display of my incompetence. In my new story, it was a moment of her own pitiable confusion. "I was not confused," she said, her voice tight. "I was helping. You were dropping things." I reached out and patted her hand, a gesture I'd seen her use 1,000 times to dismiss my feelings. It was condescending. It was perfect. "I know you thought you were helping, and that's what's so sweet. But this is a dangerous place, Linda. It's my job to keep you safe when you're here." I was recasting myself. I wasn't the fragile server. I was the capable professional. the responsible daughter-in-law managing a difficult but beloved elder. She pulled her hand away like she'd been burned. Her face was flushed. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. Other customers couldn't hear our words, but they could see the tableau. A young woman leaning in, speaking softly to an older woman, patting her hand. They saw care. They saw love. "I'm perfectly capable," she cried, her voice low and venomous. "Of course you are," I soothed. "I just worry. Brian worries too. He tells me all the time how he worries." This was a lie, a beautiful, terrible lie. Brian never worried about her in that way. He only ever worried about her being upset. But using his name was the checkmate. I was aligning myself with her son, claiming shared concern. I was turning their sacred bond into a tool for my own use. She stared at me, her mouth a thin, hard line. She was speechless. For the first time in 10 years, Linda had no script for this. I had become an unreliable narrator in her life story, and she was utterly lost. I straightened up, my professional smile clicking back into place. "Now, are you going to have lunch, or did you just pop in to say hello? Because if you're not feeling up to a meal, I could call Brian. I'm sure he could leave work for a bit to come and take you home." Her head snapped up. The threat was veiled in the silkiest concern. Calling Brian would escalate this beyond her control. He would show up and I would tell him right here in the restaurant how his mother seemed disoriented, how she didn't seem to know what she was doing. I would do it with a sad look and a heavy heart. I would make him choose, and I would make it impossible for him to choose her without looking like a cruel son ignoring his mother's failing health. She was trapped. She looked like an animal in a cage, her eyes darting around as if seeking an escape route. She had walked into my restaurant to put me in my place, and I had turned it into a gilded cage of her own. "No," she said. The word was clipped. "Don't call Brian. I'm fine." She looked down at the menu she hadn't intended to open. "I'll just have a salad." "Of course," I said. "I'll be right back." I walked away, my back straight. I didn't look back. I could feel her gaze on me, but it was different now. It wasn't the stare of a predator. It was the stare of an opponent who had just been completely and thoroughly outmaneuvered. The air in my lungs felt clean. For the first time in a long time, it felt like mine. The call came at 9 o'clock that night. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling off my work shoes, my feet aching. Brian was in the living room, watching TV. I heard his voice, initially calm, then rising in pitch. "What? No, she wouldn't. Why would she say that?" I didn't move, I just sat and listened. I closed my eyes, preparing myself. The cold resolve was still there, a block of ice in my chest. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway. His face was a mess of confusion and anger. He held his phone in his hand as if it were a weapon. "Natalie, what the hell did you say to my mother?" This was the moment the old me would have crumpled. The old me would have burst into tears, trying to explain how Linda had been tormenting me, how I was just trying to defend myself. The old me would have begged him to understand. The new me looked up at him, my expression one of deep, weary concern. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" I asked, my voice laced with alarm. He blinked. This was not the reaction he was prepared for. She's hysterical. She said you told her she was confused, that you threatened to call me to come get her, that you treated her like she was senile." I stood up and walked toward him, my face a mask of sympathy. I reached out and touched his arm. "Oh, Brian, honey, I was so worried this would happen." He stared at me, completely thrown. "What would happen?" "She had an episode today at the restaurant," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It was bad. She came in and she seemed really disoriented. She didn't know why she was there. She kept talking about the other day when she tried to carry those plates. She was completely mixed up. I got her a glass of water, and I suggested maybe she should go home and rest. I only offered to call you because I was scared to let her leave on her own. I thought she might get lost. Every word was a careful, deliberate construction, a masterpiece of fiction built on a foundation of truth. Brian's face softened, the anger dissolving into a sea of bewilderment. He was a man whose entire life was built on a simple algorithm. His mother is rational, his wife is emotional. I had just hacked the system. She seemed confused, he stammered. Deeply, I said, my voice thick with false emotion. It broke my heart to see her like that. I didn't want to tell you because I knew how much it would upset you. I was going to talk to you about it tonight. I think we might need to have her checked out. He sank onto the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. He looked at me, then at the floor, then back at me. He was trying to reconcile two impossible, competing realities. The one from his mother, who was furious and felt attacked, and the one from me, calm, loving, and deeply worried about his mother's health. Linda's version was pure emotion. Mine was presented as reluctant, painful fact. He had no defense against it. His entire strategy for dealing with me, that I was too sensitive, that I was misinterpreting things, was useless. How could he tell me I was being too sensitive about his own mother's potential cognitive decline? He looked so small, so lost. The man who had refused to be my protector for a decade was now completely disarmed because I had finally stopped asking him to protect me. I had instead asked him to protect his mother from herself. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a dawning, helpless horror. She's never been like that before. I know, I said softly, sitting next to him. I didn't touch him. It was scary. He had nothing to say. The silence that filled our bedroom wasn't the old, tense silence of things left unsaid. It was something new. It was the sound of a foundation cracking, the sound of a world tilting on its axis. He was lost in it, and for the first time, I was not. The silence in the car was a weapon, not my weapon or his. It was a third presence, a heavy, suffocating thing that sat in the space between us. I kept my hands laced in my lap, my knuckles white. I focused on the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers, pushing away a light mist that had started to fall. Each swipe was a metronome counting down to the explosion I knew was coming. He didn't speak. Not when we pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, leaving the warm glow of its sign behind us. Not as we merged onto the highway. He just drove, the hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. His jaw a hard line of granite. I could feel him looking at me without turning his head. He was studying me, trying to solve an equation that no longer added up. The old rules were broken. I had spent months being the variable, the part of his life that was too sensitive and too dramatic. Now I was a constant. I was the calm, immovable object his mother had just crashed against. I still feel the ghost of that car ride. It was the beginning of the end, or maybe the end of the beginning. It's hard to tell. All I know is that the man sitting next to me was a stranger. Or maybe I was the stranger. We were halfway home when he finally broke. His voice was rough, scraped raw. What was that, Natalie? I didn't pretend not to understand. I turned to him, my expression a careful mask of gentle confusion. It was the same look I had perfected in the restaurant. What was what, honey? Don't do that, he said, his voice rising. You know exactly what I'm talking about, with my mother. I let out a soft, weary sigh. Brian, she was having an episode. She was confused. She wasn't making sense. I was worried about her, weren't you? He made a choked, frustrated sound. An episode? She was upset because you were being cruel. The word hung in the air. Cruel. It was the word he had always been afraid to use for his mother's behavior toward me. It was a word I had swallowed 1,000 times. Hearing it from him, aimed at me, was like being struck. For a second, the cold resolve in my chest faltered. A part of me, the old me, wanted to crumble, to cry, to scream that she was the cruel one, that he had let her be cruel to me for years. But the cold, hard thing in my chest held firm. Was it cruel to be concerned? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Was it cruel to make sure she was all right? She seemed so lost, Brian. Did you see her eyes? She looked right through me. I was borrowing from her playbook, using the language of care as a cudgel. And it was working. He had no defense against it. He couldn't argue that my concern was invalid without sounding like a monster. She's not confused, Natalie. She's my mother, he snapped, as if that explained everything, as if that was a magical incantation that excused all behavior. I know she's your mother, I said, my voice still even. That's why I was so worried. It's frightening to see someone you love in that state. He was trapped. I had built the cage myself, using his own logic for the bars. He always defended her intentions over her impact. She's just trying to help. She's just worried about you. Now I was the one with good intentions. I was just trying to help. I was just worried. He couldn't condemn the action without condemning the motive he had spent a decade defending. The rest of the ride passed in the same thick silence. But it was different now. It was his silence, not ours. He was trapped in it. When we got home, he slammed the car door. I closed mine softly. I walked into the house and turned on the lamp in the living room, the soft light pooling on the floor. It was our home, a compromised space, the place where so many of my battles had been fought and lost. The night felt different. Brian came in and threw his keys on the small table by the door. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet room. "You have to stop this," he said, his back to me. "Stop what? Stop caring about your mother?" He whirled around, his face flushed with an anger I hadn't seen in years. "Stop playing this game. You humiliated her, Natalie. You did it on purpose. You treated her like she was a child, like she was senile." "She was acting like a child," I said, and my voice finally lost its gentle edge. It was flat, cold. "She came to my job to throw a tantrum because I finally stood up for myself. What was I supposed to do, Brian? Let her win? Let her burn down the one place that was mine? It's not about winning, isn't it?" I took a step toward him. "For 10 years, she has been winning. Every time she criticized my cooking, my cleaning, my job, my parenting, she won. Every time you told me I was being too sensitive, she won. Every time I cried in this house alone because my own husband wouldn't defend me, she won." My voice was rising, and I didn't care. The dam was breaking. "She came to my restaurant to break me," I said, my voice trembling now, but with rage, not weakness. "She wanted to show me that nowhere was safe, that she could get to me anywhere. And you just let her. You always just let her." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked lost. The accusation, clear and direct, had finally landed. It wasn't about Linda anymore. It was about him. "That's not fair," he whispered. "Fair?" I laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Fair was never part of the deal. The deal was I absorb it all. I take the hits and you get to keep the peace. You get to have a happy mom and a quiet wife. But the wife isn't quiet anymore, Brian. The wife is done. His phone buzzed on the table. We both looked at it. "Mom." "Of course." He hesitated, his eyes flicking from the phone to my face. It was a moment of choice. A crossroads. I saw it all in that split second. His duty, his exhaustion, his fear. He chose her. He always chose her. He picked up the phone and walked into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. I stood alone in the living room, listening to the muffled cadence of his voice. I couldn't make out the words, just the soothing, placating tone he used when he was managing her, the tone he used to use on me. I sank onto the couch. I wasn't crying. I felt hollowed out. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of our lives, and I was just now beginning to survey the wreckage. I had won the battle at the restaurant. I had seized control. But sitting there in my compromised home, listening to my husband comfort the woman who had tried to destroy me, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an armistice. A temporary pause in a war that had just escalated beyond my wildest imagination. After 10 minutes, the kitchen door opened. Brian stood in the doorway, his face pale. He looked older. "She's hysterical," he said, his voice flat. "She thinks you're trying to have her declared incompetent. She said you're trying to get power of attorney." The accusation was so outlandish, so perfectly Linda, that I almost laughed again. She wasn't just playing the victim, she was building a legal case against me in the court of her son's opinion. I looked up at him, my face a blank slate. I summoned the last of my performance. "Power of attorney?" I said, my voice filled with a quiet, shocked horror. "Brian, that's a very paranoid thing to say. Is she okay? Really? Maybe she's had a small stroke or something. People get confused. They say things that don't make sense. Maybe we should call her doctor." I watched the final pieces of his certainty crumble. He looked from me, the picture of rational concern, to the kitchen door, behind which his mother was apparently spinning conspiracies of a hostile takeover. He was caught in the crossfire, and my bullets looked exactly like love and worry. He didn't know who to believe. And in his world, a world built on avoiding conflict, that was the most terrifying place to be. He didn't answer me, he didn't look at me, he just turned and walked down the hall. Not to our bedroom, but to the guest room at the far end of the house. I heard the click of the door shutting. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was empty. A vacuum where a marriage used to be. And I know now that's a much more dangerous thing. The click of the guest room door was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Louder than the dinner rush, louder than a plate shattering on the tile floor, louder than my own heart hammering in my ears just moments before. It was a sound of finality, a lock turning on a future I hadn't asked for but had apparently created. I stood alone in the hallway. The space he had occupied was now a vacuum, cold and empty. I had won. That's what it was, wasn't it? I had taken Linda's game and played it better than she did. I had used her own weapons concern, pity, the gentle language of a caretaker, and turned them back on her. I had watched the confusion cloud Brian's face, watched him pivot between his hysterical mother and his calm, worried wife, and seen his certainty crumble. He didn't know who to believe. For the first time in our 10 years of marriage, he didn't automatically believe her. I had won. I felt nothing. No, that's not true. I felt something. It was a vast, hollow emptiness. The adrenaline drained out of me, leaving behind a residue that felt like ice. I walked into our kitchen, the one Linda had criticized 1,000 times, and leaned against the counter. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked at them, turning them over under the dim light. These were the same hands that had shaken with rage and anxiety for months. The same hands that fumbled orders when she was watching me from that corner booth. Now they were still. They felt like a stranger's hands. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in our my bed for the night and stared at the ceiling. The house was a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator was magnified. I kept waiting for the guest room door to open, for Brian to come back, to demand an explanation, to yell, to do anything. He did nothing. The silence was its own kind of accusation. It was Brian's retreat, his ultimate act of conflict avoidance. He couldn't fix it. He couldn't smooth it over, so he had simply removed himself from the equation. He had left me alone with the victory I had engineered. It was what I wanted, wasn't it? For him to stop enabling her? But seeing it happen, feeling the chasm it opened between us was terrifying. I had broken the dynamic, but I might have broken my marriage too. The next morning, the silence was worse. It was thick with everything unsaid. I got up and made coffee, my movements slow and deliberate. I was a performer in my own home, playing the part of a woman who was not falling apart, a woman who was in control. I heard the guest room door creak open. I didn't turn. I just stood there, pouring coffee into a mug, my back to him. I felt his presence in the doorway of the kitchen. He was watching me. For a split second, I felt like I was back at the restaurant with Linda's eyes boring into my spine. "Nat," he said. His voice was rough. I turned slowly, my face arranged into an expression of gentle, weary concern. The same one I'd used yesterday. It felt like putting on a mask. "Good morning, honey. Did you get any sleep?" He just stared at me. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't looking at me with anger. It was something far more unsettling. It was confusion, fear. He was looking at me like he didn't know who I was. "I don't know what happened yesterday," he said, his voice quiet. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the coffee pot, the counter, the floor, anywhere but at me. "Your mom had a difficult episode," I said softly, taking a sip of coffee. I made my voice soothing. "I think the stress of everything is just getting to be too much for her." "She called me last night," he mumbled. After I went to the guest room, she was hysterical. Said you were trying to make me think she's crazy." I let out a long, sad sigh. I had practiced this sigh in my head all night. "Oh, Brian, of course she did. She's scared and confused. It's a classic symptom. She feels like she's losing control, so she's lashing out." I walked over to him and put a hand on his arm. He flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but I felt it like a shock. I pulled my hand back. "We just have to be patient," I continued, my voice unwavering. "The worst thing we could do right now is pressure her. She needs to feel safe. I think it's best if we both give her some space for a few days. Let her calm down." He finally looked at me. "Give her space?" Nat, she thinks you're trying to have her committed." "Her words were power of attorney, Brian." I corrected him gently. "It's a very specific, very paranoid delusion. Don't you see? Arguing with her will only make it worse. It will only prove her fears right. We have to be the calm ones. We have to be rational." He ran a hand through his hair. He looked lost, completely and utterly lost. His entire world, built on the simple foundation that his mother was a saint and his wife was just a little too sensitive, had been leveled. He had no framework for this, no script. I have to go to work," he said finally. It was his escape hatch, the one he always took. "Okay, honey," I said. "We can talk more tonight. It's going to be okay. We'll get through this." He nodded, but it was a jerky, uncertain gesture. He grabbed his keys and left without another word. He didn't kiss me goodbye. I stood in the kitchen until I heard his car pull out of the driveway. Then I let my head fall forward and pressed my forehead against the cool kitchen cabinet. The mask fell away. My breath came out in a ragged, shuddering gasp. It was so much harder than I thought it would be. Being her, being this cold, calculating, concerned person, it was a poison. I was using it to survive, but I could feel it seeping into my own bones. The day passed in a blur. I didn't have a shift at the restaurant, and for that I was grateful. I couldn't have faced it. I couldn't have faced David, my manager, or my co-workers. I couldn't have pretended to be normal. I cleaned the house, I scrubbed floors and washed windows. I needed the physical labor, the mindless repetition. With every circle of the sponge, I tried to scrub away the feeling of Brian's flinch. With every sweep of the broom, I tried to push away the image of his lost, frightened face. He avoids conflict like it's a physical threat. I had become the threat. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Brian. My stomach clenched. "Hello?" "Nat." His voice was tight and tighter than this morning. Something was wrong. "Are you sitting down?" "Brian, what is it? What's happened?" There was a pause. I could hear him take a deep breath. "My Aunt Carol just called me. My mom called her this morning." Of course she did. This was the next move. She couldn't win with Brian, so she was expanding the battlefield. She was recruiting soldiers. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "And what did your mother tell her?" "She told Carol that you've been acting erratically, that you're under a lot of stress, and that you had some kind of breakdown at her. She said you started accusing her of being confused and forgetful right in front of me. It was brilliant, so twisted and so smart. She was taking my exact strategy and painting it as an unhinged attack. She was framing my calculated defense as a psychotic break. She was the victim again, the poor elderly mother being gaslighted by her unstable daughter-in-law. And what else? I asked. My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming. Brian hesitated. "Nat. She told Aunt Carol that she's worried you're trying to get me to sign over power of attorney for her finances. She said you're trying to build a case that she's mentally incompetent so you can take her money." There it was. The seed she had planted in a moment of fury had now been cultivated and sown into fertile ground. Aunt Carol, the family gossip. It wouldn't take an hour for that story to spread to every corner of their family. Natalie, the gold digger. Natalie, the predator. Natalie, who was trying to steal from a helpless old woman. "Brian," I said, and the calm in my own voice scared me. "What did you say to her?" What could I say? I told her it was a misunderstanding. I told her things were just tense right now, but she didn't believe me, Nat. She was talking about getting a lawyer to protect my mom. A lawyer. A black hole opened in the corner of my kitchen. It was sucking all the air out of the room. Linda hadn't just retaliated. She had escalated this into a war I couldn't possibly win. She was setting a legal trap. She was turning me from a difficult daughter-in-law into a criminal. "Brian, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, my knuckles white from gripping the phone. "This is exactly what I was talking about. This is the paranoia. This is the lashing out. She feels threatened, so she's creating a bigger threat." "Is it, Nat?" he asked, and his voice was thin, fragile, teetering on an edge. "Is it paranoia? Or did you push her into this? What did you think was going to happen?" And that was the question. He wasn't on my side. He wasn't on her side. He was in a no man's land, and the ground was giving way beneath his feet. Linda had done more than just call her sister. She had just handed Brian a story that made sense to him, a story where his wife wasn't a victim, but an aggressor, a story where his mother wasn't a manipulator, but a target. It was a story he might just be desperate enough to believe. It's funny, the words you can't take back. Not just the ones you say, but the ones you hear. Gold digger, unstable, lawyers. They don't just echo, they land. They sink into your bones and stay there, heavy and cold. They become a part of your architecture. The first call was from Brian's Aunt Carol. Her voice was syrupy with false concern. "Natalie, dear, I just spoke with Linda. I'm so worried about her. She sounds absolutely beside herself." I stood in the kitchen. The phone pressed hard against my ear. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch. "She's saying the most awful things," Carol continued, filling the void I had left for her. That you're trying to have her declared incompetent to get her money. She's even talking about getting lawyers involved to protect herself. I watched Brian walk into the room, his face open and tired from his day. He saw my expression and his smile faltered. "Is that Linda?" he mouthed. I shook my head slowly. "Thank you for letting me know, Carol," I said, my voice as flat and smooth as polished stone. "We'll handle it." I hung up before she could offer any more of her poisonous sympathy. Brian set his briefcase down. The click of the latches sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "What was that?" "That was your Aunt Carol," I said. I didn't move from my spot. I was beginning to feel rooted to the linoleum floor. "She was just passing along a message from your mother." He waited. He knew it was bad. He avoids conflict like it's a physical threat. And he could smell it in the air, thick as smoke. "Your mother is telling the family that I'm a gold digger," I said. Each word was a small hard stone I placed on the counter between us. "She is telling them I am trying to have her declared mentally unfit so I can steal her inheritance. She is threatening to hire a lawyer." I watched his face. I watched it crumble. This was the moment, the precipice. For 10 years, I had watched him perform the same dance. He would listen, his expression pained. He would absorb my hurt, and then he would repackage it, soften it, and hand it back to me as a misunderstanding. "She doesn't mean it that way, she's just lonely. That's just how she is." But this was different. This wasn't a veiled insult of a dinner. This wasn't an invasive question about our finances. This was an accusation, a public one. It was slander. The word lawyers hung in the air, and it changed everything. "Oh, Nat," he started. His hands came up in a gesture of helplessness. She's scared. You backed her into a corner and she's lashing out." There it was, the familiar script. I felt something inside me finally go cold and quiet. The part of me that always hoped, that always waited for him to finally see. It just stopped. "No, Brian," I said. My voice was quiet. It had to be. If I spoke any louder, it would have shattered. "This isn't lashing out. This is a planned attack. She is trying to destroy my reputation. She is accusing me of a crime." "It's not a crime to be a gold digger," he said, a pathetic attempt at logic. "It is a crime to defraud an elderly person, which is what she's implying I'm planning. And threatening legal action takes it out of the realm of family drama." I took a small, steadying breath. This is no longer something I can just absorb. This is not me being too sensitive. I used his own words against him. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He ran a hand through his hair. He started pacing. That's what he did. When the walls closed in, he looked for a door that wasn't there. Okay. So what do we do? I'll call her. I'll tell her to stop." "And what will you say, Brian?" I asked. My tone wasn't sharp. It was genuinely curious. I was a scientist observing a specimen. "What exactly are you going to say to her?" "I'll tell her she's gone too far, that she has to apologize." "She won't," I said simply. "She will tell you that she is the victim. She will cry. She will say she is terrified of me. She will ask how you can take my side over your own mother's, who she will remind you is old and vulnerable and alone." He stopped pacing and stared at me. He looked at me as if I were the architect of this whole nightmare, the one who had written his mother's lines. He was right. I had heard them all before. "So what?" he asked, his voice rising. "What do you want me to do, Natalie? Just cut her out of my life? Never speak to my own mother again?" "I have never asked you to do that," I said calmly. The calm was my armor. It was the only thing holding me together. I am not asking you to do that now. I am telling you what she has done, and I am telling you that I will not be in a room with her again. I will not take her calls. I will not have her in our home. And I will protect myself. Protect yourself? What does that even mean? Are you going to get a lawyer? He said it like an accusation, like I was the one escalating things. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I am the one being threatened with lawyers, Brian. I reminded him gently. I'm not the one who made this a legal issue. She did. He sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. He looked small. He looked like a boy caught between two warring forces he couldn't comprehend. My husband, the good, kind man, was a black hole of inaction. He didn't stop conflict. He just absorbed all the light around it until everyone was in the dark. I walked over to him. I didn't touch him. I stood beside his chair, looking down at the top of his head. I felt a pang of something pity, maybe, or the ghost of a love that was suffocating under the weight of his weakness. For 10 years, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I have managed your mother for you. I took the hits. I absorbed the criticism. I navigated her moods and her invasions and her judgments. I did it because I love you and because you asked me to. You told me it was the price of peace. He didn't look up. But this is too high a price, I continued. She has invaded my safe space. She has tried to get me fired. And now she is telling our family that I'm a criminal. There is no more managing this, Brian. There is no smoothing it over. An accusation has been made, a line has been drawn, and you are standing on it. Silence. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I knew what I had to do. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It felt like an amputation. So you have to make a choice, I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. They were too hard, too sharp. You either tell your mother that her accusation is a lie and that if she ever says it again to anyone, you will stand with your wife, publicly, or you do nothing, and I will know that you have chosen her. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red. That's not fair, Nat. That's not a choice. It's the only choice there is, I said. I looked at him, really looked at him, my husband, the man I had built a life with, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he even said a word. He would not do it. He couldn't. The gravitational pull of his mother was too strong. He would try to bargain. He would try to find a third way, a path of appeasement that didn't exist. He would ask me again to be the one who sacrificed. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't have to hear his excuses. I didn't have to hear him explain why protecting his wife from a slanderous attack was too much to ask. I already knew. My compassion had been a blank check she kept cashing. And now my husband had just told me the account was overdrawn, but he was asking me to cover the charges anyway. I was wrong. I wasn't a scientist observing a specimen. I was the specimen, pinned to a board, dissected by two people who claimed to love me, and I had finally stopped wriggling. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. They felt like tiny shards of glass, impossible to breathe in without getting cut. I had said them. I had finally said the thing that could not be unsaid. Choose. Brian just stood there. His face, usually so open and kind, was a blank mask of disbelief. Not anger, not sadness. Just a profound, empty shock, as if I had suddenly started speaking a language he'd never heard before. He looked from my face to the wall behind me, then back again, his eyes searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He avoids conflict like it's a physical threat, and I had just built a cage of it around him. Nat, he finally whispered. His voice was thin. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Brian, I said, and my own voice was frighteningly calm. The panic that had been a constant hum under my skin for months was gone. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. She did this, and you let her. It's not a choice, he stammered, running a hand through his hair. It was his tell, the gesture he made when he was overwhelmed, when he wanted the world to just stop for a minute so he could catch his breath. She's my mother. You're my wife. It's not a choice. But it was. It always had been. I watched the man I loved crumble, and the part of me that always wanted to fix him, to smooth things over, was just gone. It had been eroded, worn away by 1,000 little surrenders. Every time I had swallowed my frustration, every time I had accepted as that's just how she is, every time I had let him hand me the burden of his mother's happiness, my compassion had been a blank check she kept cashing, and he was the one who kept handing it to her. "You're right," I said softly. "It's not a choice you have to make right now." A flicker of relief crossed his face. Hope. He thought I was backing down. He thought the old Natalie was back, the one who would eventually sigh and absorb the pain to keep the peace. I was wrong. He was wrong. "You already made it," I finished. His face fell. "What? No, I haven't done anything." "Exactly." His silence was the answer. It was the answer every time he'd called me sensitive. It was the answer when he told me she was just trying to help. It was the answer when he saw me come home from the restaurant, my hands shaking and my spirit broken, and told me to just ignore her. His inaction was his action. His refusal to stand up for me was him standing with her. He didn't have to say a word. He had been shouting his allegiance for years, and I had just been refusing to listen. I looked at him, really looked at him. The good, kind man I had married. The man who brought me soup when I was sick and held my hand during scary movies. But that man disappeared when his mother appeared. In his place was a scared little boy, terrified of disappointing his mommy. And I couldn't be married to a little boy anymore. I needed a partner. I turned and walked out of the living room. Each step was deliberate, heavy. The sound of my own feet on the hardwood floor of the hallway echoed in the quiet house. Our house. A space that was supposed to be safe. It hadn't been safe for a long time. It was just the primary stage for her invasions, before she'd decided to conquer new territory. "Natalie, where are you going?" His voice was panicked now. The reality of it was sinking in. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. Up the stairs, my hand sliding along the smooth wood of the banister we had picked out together. I remembered the day we'd chosen it. We'd argued playfully over the color of the stain. It felt like a memory from someone else's life. In our bedroom, I went to the closet and pulled down the large black suitcase from the top shelf, the one we used for vacations, for trips to the beach, for happier times. It made a dull thud as I set it on the bed. The sound was so final. I opened drawers, t-shirts, jeans, sweaters. I folded them neatly. My movements were automatic, detached. I was a machine performing a task. It was easier that way. If I let myself feel, I would shatter. I was a vase that had been cracked 100 times, and this was the final tremor that would turn it all to dust. I saw the gray sweatshirt he loved, the one I always stole on cold mornings. My hand hovered over it. For a second, the machine faltered. A memory surfaced, us on the couch tangled together under a blanket, the scent of his cologne on the worn fabric. My throat tightened. I left it there. I packed my work uniforms first. The crisp black shirts, the aprons. They were mine. They represented the one part of my life I had built for myself, the part she had tried so desperately to tear down. They were my armor. I would need them. "What are you doing?" Brian was standing in the doorway, his face pale. He looked small. You can't leave." "I can," I said, not looking at him. I moved to the bathroom, gathering my toothbrush, my face wash, the mundane artifacts of a life. "You've shown me I can't stay." "I'll talk to her," he said, his voice cracking. "I promise I'll call her. I'll tell her. I'll tell her she has to stop." I stopped what I was doing and finally turned to face him. I saw the desperation in his eyes, the terror. It was real, but it was too late. "When, Brian?" I asked. My voice was devoid of heat. It was just tired, so incredibly tired. "When will you call her? Tomorrow morning, after you've had a good night's sleep and decided I'm overreacting again? Or will you wait a few days to let things cool down? Will you call her and say, 'Mom, Natalie's really upset. Maybe you could just ease up a little'? Will you frame it as my problem, my sensitivity?" He had no answer. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Because we both knew that's exactly what he would do. He would manage my feelings, not her behavior. He always did. "You won't defend me," I said, the realization settling not like a bomb, but like a slow, cold blanket of snow. "You'll ask her to accommodate my fragility. You'll make me the problem you're trying to solve for her. You will never ever stand in front of me and say, Mom, you are wrong. What you did to my wife was cruel and I will not allow it. You can't. Your spine is made of dust when it comes to her. I zipped up my toiletries bag and put it in the suitcase. Then I zipped the suitcase. The sound was loud, obscene, a final, definitive rip through the fabric of our marriage. I walked toward the door, toward him. He didn't move. He was a statue of regret. Please, he whispered as I came face to face with him, don't go. We can fix this. I looked into his eyes, the eyes I had loved for 10 years. No, I know we can't. You have to fix this. You have to fix the part of you that is more afraid of your mother's disapproval than you are of losing your wife. And you have to do it alone. I gently moved past him. He didn't try to stop me. I walked down the stairs, my hand on the handle of the suitcase, the little wheels clicking against the floor. I didn't look back at the photos on the wall, or the couch we'd spent hundreds of hours on, or the kitchen where I'd made him 1,000 meals. It was all his now, all of it, him and his mother's ghosts. I opened the front door. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and clean. It was the first time I felt like I could actually breathe all night. I pulled the door shut behind me. I didn't slam it. There was no anger left for that. It just clicked, a small quiet sound that ended everything. I'm sitting in a hotel room now. It's sterile and anonymous. The silence here is different from the silence in the house. That silence was heavy, full of things unsaid. This silence is just empty. It's a blank page. It's terrifying. And for the first time in a very long time, it feels like it's mine. I don't know what comes next. I only know what I left behind. I left behind a man who wouldn't choose me, and a woman who had finally chosen herself.